I've called this Chronicles of a Mid-Century Modern UCSB Coed. And what I'm going to be doing is giving you the history of both my particular experiences at UCSB and tossing a little bit of history about the school. I'm taking my stories and most of my pictures from the book that I wrote called In the Shadow of the Sign that Emily mentioned at the beginning. What I've done in this book is to give a memoir about what it was like to live on what I call the wrong side of the Hollywood sign. I thought all the glitz and glamour and excitement was over the hill from where I lived in Burbank, where my father was an animator. I came to the conclusion that wasn't true at all. It was a wonderful childhood. But the stories that I tell today are going to be coming from the book, as well as some other historical facts I'll toss in. The book is in three parts. The first part is beginning, and it tells about what it was like to live during World War II as a child going to elementary school. My father was animating at Walt Disney about what La La Land was like at that time, Hollywood, and just the beginnings until I started at UCSB. First, let's do a little school and family history. I got a lot of what I learned about my own school's history through this publication called Noticias, The Rise of UCSB. It's available through the Santa Monica Historical Museum's Glen Hill Library. It's free, and it's a very complicated history. I'm just going to be giving some highlights, but it's really fascinating. I'm also going to be telling you stories from some of my family albums. The one I'm showing here is one that my father started in the early 20s before he came out to Los Angeles from the Bayou country of Louisiana. Plus, I'll be showing pictures from the films that he's taken. And you can see some of these on my website that we'll talk about later. Well, UCSB was begun by a woman named Anna S.C. Blake. She heard about this special kind of an education that was going on in Europe. And it was an education where children are sort of the whole child is educated. And they sort of emphasized manual arts. Manual arts are the arts you do with your hands. So here you see some of the kids in the school. The boys were segregated in doing their boy type things, the carpentry, the girls doing their sewing. Well, that morphed into the Santa Barbara State Normal School of Manual Arts and Home Economics. Normal. I'm glad to know that my university comes from a normal beginning. Normal in this case has to do with teaching people how to teach these subjects. And it was up on the Riviera campus, up on the Riviera, right across from the El Encanto Hotel. As a matter of fact, the El Encanto had housing for the university. Here's commencement on the Riviera. That wonderful reflection pool is still there if you go up to the Riviera. Well, also in the 20s, in our family history, my father, Ray Patin, and his family from Louisiana visited from their new home in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, very exotic. And one of the exotic locations was the very famous Samarkand Hotel, which is now a retirement home. Here they are posing Buddha-like. My father at the top with his mother next to him, his sister in front of him, and on the other side of the Buddha is his sister's boyfriend. Here they are climbing the rocks. And I think that some of you people who are lucky enough to live in Santa Barbara may recognize some of these rocks. Here they are spread out in their beach attire. Actually, this is their traveling attire along the beach. There's that rock in the background. So you might recognize this area. Well, in 1921, Santa Barbara State Teachers College offered a more liberal arts college, and it started to grant 4-year degrees, still on the Riviera in this beautiful setting, this colorized postcard type setting. And then in 1935, it changed its name again to Santa Barbara State College and had a broader curriculum. It still had a lot of teaching, but it also had more liberal arts. Well, in 1936, a momentous thing happened, and that is Santa Barbara State Teachers College changed the school mascot from Roadrunners to Gauchos. I wonder if anybody knows why. Well, it was because of Coach Theodore Spud Harder of Harder Stadium fame. The stadium at UCSB is called Harder Stadium after him. He was a very renowned coach, having been at Stanford, and he came to teach and coach football, other sports. The athletic field that for the Santa Barbara State College is now the Santa Barbara Tennis Club. Now, Spud decided that the spindly leg roadrunner was absolutely no macho type of an mascot that he wanted for his football team. So he took a poll, and all of the students, especially the women students, were enamored of Douglas Fairbanks as the gaucho in one of his movies. And I think they put a little bit of the mark of Zorro in it too. And now we have the mascot today that we call Olé. Well, this is around the same time of a certain 1930s cartoon courtship. My father was a cartoonist. He was a high school cartoonist. He did comic strips and became an animator. And he was courting my mother, Maxine Riley, all through their courtship, all through their marriage until he passed away. He was giving her love letters and greeting cards done with cartoons. Here's one when he was working at a studio that was producing Crazy Cat animated cartoons. And he's asking Crazy, is there any way that you can help me tell Maxine how much I love her? Here's my future parents as they hit the Santa Barbara highlights. And I think that just about everybody throughout the ages hit the same highlights of Santa Barbara, that same fountain at the Mission, and of course, the gorgeous courthouse in Santa Barbara. Daddy dreamed of Disney. He wanted to be an animator there. Of course, it was #1. And so he has cartoons talking about that desire. Here he has in his red hair, which is often the only color on the his cartoons, too, that show that he got fed up with kids wanting him to draw Mickey Mouse. And he said, this is how Crazy Cat cartoonists get that way. In the one on the right, Mickey Mouse is telling Red to finish his cartoon. He said, he can't do it. Your boss is advertising for artists and I just got to eat. Well, this was 1931, and his caption below says, the starving artist gets a break, the height of the Depression. Well, it wouldn't happen for a while yet. But in 1937, my father was hired as an animator, and he specialized in drawing the Donald Duck. You can see him on the right in one of his films, actually illustrating one of the cells. You know, there are 24 frames per second in animation. So there has to be a drawing for each second of the film. So this is just one, would be one cell, one frame. On the left is a model sheet. All the animators had to draw Donald to certain specifications. This is still very true. Disney guards their characters very carefully. And so if you know Donald Duck, he has many moods, usually angry. So that's how they would draw Donald Duck. Well, talking about Disney spent quite a bit of time in Santa Barbara. And the reason was he belonged to a group of people who were interested in horses. I must say, prosperous group of fellows who were interested in horses.
It was called Los Rancheros Visitadores, and they actually took rides that and still do. They still exist, take rides from Santa Barbara into San Ynez Valley. Most recently, they've had like as many as 700 members. Disney's horse was called Minnie Mouse, by the way. You can see Walt Disney sitting with some of the members of the Los Rancheros Visitadores in this picture. In the middle is the artist Edward Borin, who is very famous as a Western artist. So he's showing a rodeo on the mission grounds here. The Edward Borin has a corner of the museum dedicated to his life and his artwork. The first time I visited the museum, they had a special exhibit out. It was chosen by the staff as one of their favorite exhibits. It's not always there, but it is a guitar case signed by all the members of Los Rancheros Visitadores. It was owned by a man who owned Weber's Bread. And you can see in the right, quite clearly in the middle, Walt Disney's signature, which is now, of course, the logo for the company. Well, in 1939, at the age of 8 months, I took my first trip to Santa Barbara, and it was documented on film by my father, who documented all my growing up. He documented the animators animating at the Disney studio. I have some of that footage on my website. That's kind of fun to watch. This one is in the trip to Santa Barbara, apparently coming from the Glendale Burbank area. They hadn't seen many cows, so he was quite enamored with the cows. But I was not impressed. Even though my father was doing cow imitations, I was sort of ignoring the whole activity. People at 8 months really don't think much about the history of Santa Barbara. And my mother also wasn't getting much of a smile out of me in front of that same fountain at the mission. Well, in 1944, Santa Barbara is thriving on the Riviera and becomes a part of the University of California system, raw UCSB-C. What happened in 1954 was quite momentous, and that is the campus moved from the Riviera to Goleta to a Marine Corps Air Station that you can see on the left here. By the way, on that, right near there, during World War II, in February of 1942, a couple of months after Pearl Harbor, the area, this beach right here, right a little bit to the left of the picture, was shelled by a submarine, a Japanese submarine. They were aiming at an oil field. It was the first time that the United States, continental United States, there were only 5 incidences where the United States had any kind of an attack. It wasn't much damage, but unfortunately, they started rumors that this is really, really going to be an attack. And they called this the Battle of Los Angeles. And sadly, it led to the evacuation of the Japanese population to the relocation camps. On the right, you see the beginnings of the university on that same side. A few of the new buildings, mostly you see barracks left over from the air station. So we're about ready to get me into campus, and that's what we have for all of part 2 of the book. Part 2 is an alphabetical order of my experiences on the campus during the last half of the 50s. Everything from academia to zippity-doo-dah. It was 1957 when I enrolled at the University of California, Santa Barbara College. Here you see more buildings at the campus. The place where I lived was Santa Rosa Hall, one of the few new buildings. and it is in the foreground, the closest to the ocean. In 1958, when I was a junior, we became the University of California, Santa Barbara. Yay, UCSB. Here is what our campus looked like, what we looked like, our skirts, never pants, well below our knees. These were a couple of the new buildings. My favorite was this library in the back, which was the site of, sometimes gentlemen caller sightings, study dates, and quite a bit of study also. Well, I want to talk now about the way we were. It'll take you a while to focus in on this, I think, fantastic cartoon that was done by one of our student artists who had a great career in cartooning with all the different activities. You even see a kid there in Mickey Mouse ears. You see some of the teachers with their blue books that they have to correct. And up in the upper corner is what's called GGRs, the Galloping Gaucho Review. So it's just a panorama of the kind of experience that I had. Actually, I can look at some of these people and I know their caricatures, including the artist. Here are two things from the yearbook that different yearbooks that started the faculty section. Both of these feature the dreaded blue book, which I understand they still use sometimes, although a lot of the testing is online. On the right, you can see a pile of blue books. The teacher has left his desk, and whoever set up this little picture for the yearbook has given an F on one of the things that the teacher has corrected. Well, here's our faculty. They are posing, even though they had a nice new arts building, one of the few on campus, they decided to be sort of artsy crafty and pose on this parallel line over the scenic trash can down below. And here are the educators. These would have been the normal school educators. I got to know a few of them in my senior year when I discovered that being a French major was really not setting me on a path toward any kind of a career choice. So I started deciding that maybe I better teach French. So I started taking a few education courses. But really, Santa Barbara is, although I'm showing a lot of fun and games, still is and was when I was there, an academic school, even though it has that party reputation. When I was there, Aldous Huxley came. He's known for his book, Brave New World, as well as his philosophy and other works. He came and did a seminar, and the students who were chosen were the best scholars from the English department. Here you see registration before computers. The girls on the left are not wearing yarmulkes. They are wearing what at that time were freshman beanies, which they no longer wear. It's considered hazing, but they are filling out the forms. Here you see everybody crowding in to get their best classes with their best teachers. And I recognize some of the teachers behind the table as well as some of the students. This was all set up in the gym, and this is how we registered for our courses. And here's our stores of knowledge. On the left, our bookstore where we bought the blue books and textbooks, which I'm sure cost a lot less than they do today. On the right, you see Dunman, which was on State Street, where we bought typewriters, typewriter ribbons. And I think there are a lot of kids that would look at this stuff and say, what's that for? That's a typewriter. And we also got the gooselit net lamps, that mid-century modern look for our desks. These were our homes away from home. A lot of them were recommissioned barracks from the air station. The one on the left on the yearbook said, one of the many scenic campus dwellings. Somebody put a for sale sign in the window. My beautiful dorm, Santa Rosa, is on the right. There was a time when their different buildings were repositioned. So I think we'll go to the next slide. And that's the one where we show some of the repurposed air station. Here, the College of Creative Studies is posted in front of barracks, and there are some Quonset huts, munitions bunkers that were used as storage until recently. One of the beautiful things about Santa Barbara, it makes it not only a beautiful campus, but a beautiful thing for students, is how we could take some of our study breaks. I really remember very vividly, after my last final, going down to the beach, lying in the sand, spreading out my arms and making snow angels in the sand with a great big sigh that it was all over. One of the highlights of my college career was pledging a sorority. By the way, you can see my little me sign there, second to the left. This is how we dressed in our white outfits, in our lovely poses, with our corsages, all correctly on our left side. And we were doing this at the Santa Barbara Women's Club, right near the Mission. I went from pledge to president. I liked everything that had to do with Delta Gamma. Had a stein. You can see here, this is donated by my friend who still lives in Santa Barbara and tells me all sorts of good things to bring me up to date. But she graduated in '62, but you can see the little Delta Gamma insignia in the front. So I have my Delta Gamma sweatshirt, my Delta Gamma lavalier with the Delta and the Gamma. I also had decals that I put on the front windshield of my little Hillman Meigs convertible that I drove around campus. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that they were supposed to be affixed inside the windshield. So the first time there was rain and the windshield wipers sort of made the letters dance all over my windshield, I had quite a display. By the end of my 4 years, I was the spring president of Delta Gamma. Our house, the DG house, was in downtown Santa Barbara at the corner of Anacapa and Arriaga. It's no longer there. Here's a picture of the house. It was owned by the Colt Gunn family, probably for a winter home. It was a Victorian, but not one of those curly Q kind of Victorians. Look at the balcony up at the top. We would go out there, the girls would go out there with a girl who had been pinned. A pinned girl wore the pin of a fraternity boy, and they would, we called them boys at that time, by the way, the boys would come and serenade the girls out on the balcony. Well, today on the right at the top is what's there today. But I think that those palm trees there might be the only vestige of what I knew as our sorority house. Down at the bottom left, you can see what use we put to the palm fronds. During rush, which is now called recruitment, when girls decide, women today, decide which sorority they want to belong to, they have a period of time when they go through the different houses who put on teas and different events. On DG's, on theme night, they had this luau with those palm fronds. Across the street from the house was this building, which was an assisted living building. And one of my sorority sisters said that she talked to some people who were there and they just loved it when there were the serenades and the theme nights and the singing and the music across the street. But the Colt House wasn't the only place that the DGs occupied. Before I was there, before the Colt House, they actually had a sorority in renting the home that is now the Music Academy of the West. And also they were at St. Mary's Retreat House. That was a sorority house at one time for the DGs.
The Kappa Alpha Theta sorority was in this building, which is still on Valerio Street. And the picture that you see here is when it was ivy covered. That car is a little bit before my time, but they had it in front of their house. The Pi Pis were up on what we call the Riviera. I know not all of you are Santa Barbara residents. As a matter of fact, I have some friends tuning in from Wisconsin, from Arizona, don't know some of the areas. So we have an area that is just really amazingly like the French Riviera. And that's where the Pi Phi house was. The Delta Tau Delta fraternity, called the Delts, occupied a mansion on Cabrillo Boulevard. I wonder if those of you who know Santa Barbara know which mansion this was. What was on Cabrillo Boulevard? And the yearbook here blanked out the Delta Tau Delta function, one of their parties, because they got a little bit raucous. Another thing that we had downtown Santa Barbara was Spring Sing that we had at the courthouse. Later, it was actually held at the county bowl. It was for different fraternities, sororities, residence halls, other groups who could sing on the courthouse steps in this particular occasion. And I can't carry a tune. And so I was always the narrator of our presentations. When I can sing is when I'm imitating Edith Piaf in singing La Vie en Rose, showing off my French major education. And here we're doing it for an event called Barbary Coast that used to be on the campus in Santa Barbara. This is our Moulin Rouge presentation. All of these events, these presentations, my parents would come up. About at that time, it took them probably close to 2 hours to drive up. During this time, during the 50s and into the 60s, my father had left Disney's and he had a studio called Ray Patin Productions, where they produced award-winning animated television commercials. They were all in black and white because when he started, that was all we had for television. That was when television had the antennas on the roof and sometimes the rabbit ears inside, and it was all black and white. My mother, once I went away to college, was able to pursue her art career. And there was a continuation of the cartoons. So you see, this was in 1975, the year before my father passed away. My father is handing my mother a Valentine, and now the red hair has faded and he has a beard, and she's standing up for herself much more than she did when she was first married. This is the 1957 cover of our yearbook, the 1957 La Cumbra. I wonder if you can figure out why I'm showing this as a fashion statement. Well, the answer is that it's showing our way of dressing that was completely a la mode. The Ivy League button at the top, which is on the back of the collar, and the buckle, which is on the back of pants. It was also on the back of shorts. It was also on the back of, I know I had a polished cotton khaki skirt, certainly below the knee, and it had that belt. And also, one of the absolute necessities of dress was the plaid. So here you see students on a new Volkswagen Beetle, ready to go up to Cal, our mother school at Berkeley. And on the right, during the Galloping Gaucho Review, you can see the use of plaid, even by this surfer in his Bermudas, including his hat. The fashionable foot wore bucks. I don't know if you ever wore bucks, but I had to. And it was, they're white suede, and you had to clean them with that little bag of white powder that you pounded on and you would get all over the place. And then, of course, there was the saddle Oxford that was de rigueur. Also, for going out with people in their cars, we had your car coats that are fashioned after the Navy pea coat, the newsboy cap. On the right, I showed my father when he first came out from Louisiana selling newspapers on the corner in Los Angeles, wearing his newspaper cap, his knickerbockers, and his button-up boots. This is the spurs. I was a spur. That's when I had to wear the white buck. I wasn't in this picture of spurs, but they had to wear once a week, announcing their affiliation, this outfit to show. And I just thought I'd explain the sort of connection with spurs and gauchos in case you didn't understand what was called spurs. We weren't a riding group. We were a scholastic achievement group. Here in fashion were some of our formal frocks. On the left, you see one of my ball gowns. This is one of my early ones. Probably I was in my freshman year. And it's repurposed from a prom dress that my mother made me. I noticed that the girl in the background sort of had the same idea. On the right is me posing in my much more sophisticated dress. I bought this at a wonderful dress shop in the El Paseo, and I just thought it was the height of fashion. Unfortunately, in trimming my bangs, I didn't quite get a good look going here. But my handsome date, John Kay, is a native of Santa Barbara and was a much honored political science professor at Santa Barbara City College. He still is a resident of Santa Barbara. One of the things that we often did was to have dances that were sponsored by groups or by fraternities and sororities at different places where we would rent the ballrooms. Often they were at the Coral Casino. On the right is the one that was held by the ROTC. It was the Reserve Officers Training Corps of people who were interested in going into the military. So this was their military ball. We also swang and cut the light fantastic, as we called it, at the Marmonte, which had a wonderful ballroom. It's now the Hyatt down on Cabrillo. Here are our cheerleaders dressed appropriately in plaid, posing, one of them in the atrium of the music building, another one near the library. The gaucho spirit probably came out at its height for homecoming. That's when we did a parade down State Street. Those glorious floats that you just saw were handcrafted by fraternities, sororities, other resident groups. Here in the Kappa Sig fraternity posing with the thing that's going to be a float. You can see on the right how they were built. You build a structure on top of a flatbed truck, cover it with chicken wire, and then stuff crepe paper in, much like the Rose Parade. I'm afraid most of our floats did not look quite like the Rose Parade. Here is the Alpha Phi float floating down State Street in front of the Red Cross Drug Company. We had one theme was wisdom. So you see the Odyssey float on the left with the Cal Bear in front. And you see on the right, justice, truth, and wisdom, showing how academic we were at that time. Or at least we tried to make it look as if we were. Here are two of the queens, both happen to be sorority sisters. On the right is Elaine Noble, who was a Santa Barbara native and has lived in Santa Barbara. I'm not sure she's still living in Santa Barbara, but her father was the vice provost when we were in school of UCSB.
As Santa Barbara and the world evolved, we revolved in our own little world, as I was showing you in pictures of the way we were. There's downtown State Street as it was changing, as you can see the cars. In the middle, the brand new Giordano's in that mid-century modern style. On the right, you see an ad for a menswear, a haberdasher on State Street, where the student representative to the campus is leaving and going into the military. This was getting into the Vietnam War, and he's welcoming the new representative. One of the things that we did downtown was go to Joe's favorite date night. Love to squirm into one of those wonderful wood and leather booths and have long conversations, acting as if we really understood the Ingmar Bergman film that we had just seen, and long conversations. Special soirees. On the left is the Plow and Angel at the San Ysidro Ranch. I remember my boyfriend and I going there one time, and he was actually poor. He was a poor boy from San Francisco. He didn't have a jacket. They told him he had to have a jacket. They gave him one. He was also short. So when he put it on, the sleeves came down below his hands. On the right is a place that we love to go for special occasions, into San Marcos Pass to the wonderful Cold Spring Tavern. Well, speaking of boyfriends, this was my college senior and graduate school boyfriend. His name was Rich. He wasn't rich, but now he is. You'll learn more about him later. He was an English major. As a matter of fact, he was part of that Aldous Huxley seminar, a brilliant guy, but here he's paid spatter because his passion was art. He and I would go from his house in Isla Vista, where he was living in a fisherman's shack, to the arts building in the evening. And we would go to the art studio where he was working on something. And I like to play as if I was his muse. He said I couldn't be his model because I wasn't fat enough. Those were the days. There's the lagoon that we would walk around. It's behind the arts department, where we would walk together after our session with his artwork. Well, speaking of Isla Vista was considered the bohemian beatnik left bank. I was kind of a woman of two minds, kind of a split personality, as a sorority president downtown, and then going in to see my boyfriend in Isla Vista. Here you see an early picture. This would be in the 70s, where you see the Bank of America building. That is a replacement building for the Bank of America building that was burned down in 1970 as a protest against the Vietnam War. Today, they have a different building, but it is also on that same site that is classrooms for UCSB. And the Isla Vista Market still exists, but this is the early version of it. Now we're going to go into the third part of my book called Being. And it is what happened to that kid, that girl who became a woman at UCSB. What kind of a woman grows up on the wrong kind of the side of the sign and goes to Santa Barbara with the education she has and sort of wraps it up in the book. It's the end of the book. Well, I've been rediscovering UCSB ever since I graduated. Of course, this entry that is donated by one of our alumni was not in existence. One time when I went back for what is called the Golden Gaucho Review, the Golden Gaucho Reunion, during the time of the Gaucho Reunion, All Gaucho Reunion, which is happening this week. It's for us golden age people. And one time I heard some alumni
who are friends of mine, talking about the fact that we didn't have a decent gaucho to pose with. Well, they thought that the Olay was not quite the type that families wanted to pose around when they came to the school to see their kids. And so they finally commissioned this beautiful statue created by an Argentinian woman who certainly knows gauchos. And it's bronze, it's on the terrace of the Mosher Alumni Building. Something else that happened after I left for a short time and then it was stopped was that they started doing the tortilla tossing in Harder Stadium. They would shout, "Ole," and toss tortillas. That is long gone for many reasons. But oh, how we grew. There's the picture of where we started over there. There's the building of the highlight, the sort of the landmark of the campus, Stork Tower, and you can see the map over there, which is certainly nothing. Look at Isla Vista over on the side there. It's a place where it's easy to get lost for me now. Speaking of getting lost, there's a picture from the yearbook of Ocean Avenue, kind of, I think it's called Ocean Avenue, through the eucalyptuses, which are much taller now. And I'm showing this gaucho gridlock of bicycles here because I remember one time I was visiting the campus and there was a crosswalk right where you see the road curve. And it seemed like the migration of the wildebeest in Africa. There were bikes, there were skateboards, there were students, one after another that seemed to go on forever before I could go ahead. I looked for some of the buildings that were part of the campus when I was there. I found what I think this is the building where the art department posed. I don't think it's there anymore, but I was able to find it. I think it was about 10 years ago. The one building that exists in the picture on the left is what was our student union, now dwarfed by the trees, the high rises beyond. This was the center for all the activities on campus. It was a place where we had the gaucho room, where we met for study dates and conversation. And I thought I would compare that with the student union on campus today. I went on sort of a quest for knowledge. I went to the new library on the right in order to find the old library, which was so important to me when I was in school. I asked one of the patient librarians where was the old library, and she pointed down a hall, sort of at a wall. I said, "Oh, on the other side of that wall down the mall?" And she said, "No, it was on the other side of that wall. It's gone now." One thing that has happened in 1994, which seems like yesterday, but I guess it was a few years ago, was that my boyfriend, Richard Serra, became a distinguished alumni member of the from the Alumni Association for the work that he did in sculpture. I went to the reunion and sat at the head table with him and we reminisced, and we have seen each other several times since we graduated. His fame came from, as a sculptor, from doing these gigantic sculptures that are called torqued ellipses. In the picture on the far left and in the middle, you see the one that's at the Guggenheim Bilbao. Look at the tiny people. The idea is to walk through the sculpture so you become part of the sculpture. Here I'm about ready to enter the one that's at Stanford in Palo Alto. For 2 years, it was actually at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, but it was removed back to Stanford, where it is now. So back to Isla Vista, it is a place where filled with fun places to live. It's where the majority of students have their housing, including all the sororities and fraternities, most of the sororities and fraternities. And there's a map on the left. Very active, particularly at party time, so much so they've had it, some of them go out of control, and at times they've had to actually cut off access into Isla Vista because of party time. And the DG home is there now, this beautiful southern mansion. Comparing it to the Coed house up above, I've visited it. Unfortunately, I was never able to live there. I was a president when I was able to get a shovel and shovel the first dirt when they turned the ground. I cut the ribbon for the opening, and I actually installed a time capsule, and I think it's installed to the right of the door. I'm hoping that the chapter will open it during my lifetime. I'm dying to find out what I put in there. Yeah, I think it would be great fun for the DGs on the left to have this picture of DGs in the future. I mean, they wouldn't have had AI. I mean, they couldn't have created something like this, but it could be imagined, and they think it would be something like science fiction. Remember the child estate? I said the Delts lived in this house. It was on the location of the child estate mansion at the Santa Barbara Zoo, appropriately for the Delts, where they had their blacked out place. And when I went to the zoo the first time, I actually found the steps that led up to that mansion. Then I visited the cemetery across the street. And here I'm posing in a little memory as we get toward the end of the presentation of a time when I went to what was called a joint. A joint was a joint party between the fraternity and sorority at the Delta Tau Delta house at the child estate. And one of the young men said, "Would you like to go wading?" And I said, "Oh, cool." And I imagine us romantically wading in the little area of the beach across the street. What I found out was we were going to a bench called Waiting, and he set up a candle and a romantic interlude. Nothing bad. Romantic interlude ensued. In 1960, I graduated in the music building. The 270 of us fit into the little atrium of the music building. I understand from a friend who has a granddaughter, a sorority sister who has a granddaughter graduating, that this year they're going to do it at the lagoon behind the arts building. In 2022, they had 6,500. Today, Santa Barbara, which I'm very proud to say I am alum from, has 26,000 students. It's a public university regarded as a public Ivy League school. It is currently has 6 Nobel Prize laureates, and if you go on their site, you'll see all the accolades. And it's classified among doctoral universities as very high in research activity. So, what did that mid-century modern co-ed do with her UCSB diploma? I went to UCLA Graduate School and got a general secondary teaching credential so I could teach. I'm taught mostly English and French. I sold cells at Disneyland and demonstrated how animation is done. I did art studies at the Louvre in Paris and started my many-year quest of going to the greatest art museums. I was a secondary teacher in California and in Switzerland. I developed educational toys and materials in different national companies. My husband and I built a boat. Well, actually, I guess I should call it a yacht, 57 feet long on the West Coast, and we sailed it to the East Coast where we lived and cruised. I told about those adventures as a magazine writer, also wrote about arts and other subjects, and I still am an educator.
mostly of art appreciation and writing at our Ollie program at UCSB. My companion today, who's been running the slideshow, is one of the administrators at our great Ollie program, Leslie. And thank you for your help, Leslie. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It really is exciting for me to be able to share all of this. And thanks to the Santa Barbara Historical Museum. Emily was just great in getting this done. Be sure, if you haven't visited the museum, it's fantastic. Do visit it when you're in Santa Barbara. And get in touch with me. You can do that through my website, reneefarrington.com. My book is available in the Santa Barbara Historical Museum bookshop. They have the colored version where I mentioned, and Emily mentioned, there's 1,000 pictures in the book. It's really a picture storybook, large format. Theirs is a soft cover color version. If you get it on Amazon, if you're not lucky enough to live in Santa Barbara area, they have 5 versions. They have Kindle, they have hardcover, soft cover, black and white, and color. So that's it. Again, my thanks.